about books. They are quite popular. You might be thinking of writing one yourself, but you might also be worried, hey, I don't actually know that much about books or that many different books. Can I still write a book about books? And I want to say, yes, you do not actually have to know about books or have any books in your book to write a book with books. That might sound strange to you, but it is definitely doable, and a lot of people have been doing it lately, so you shouldn't have any issue. So I'm going to go over 5 non-book ways to incorporate books into your story to make your readers think you have books in it without actually having the books. And then I'm going to go over some tips that'll help you flesh out your main protagonist. So let's get started. In your book about books, you'll probably want to have some main, really important book or books, plural, that is very important to your main characters. Now, in order to write the big important book, the first thing you need to do is imagine it's literally anything besides a book. Like, imagine it's a teddy bear plushie, or a mysterious box, or a cassette tape with a secret message on it. Everything your characters can do with those non-book items, such as finding it, protecting it from the bad guys, having it stolen, having to get it back, moving it from point A to point B, using it to defeat a villain, you can also do with a book. Just have one of those things, a MacGuffin, or in this case, a MacBookin, and make it a book. And your characters should not have to actually open the book at any point, but if they do, then that will segue into my second use for books in Stories Without Books. So here is technique number 2. In technique number 1, we discussed how to use books as MacGuffins. In technique 2, this is how to use books as clues, or the information inside of books. So basically, when you have your characters actually open up and read what's on the page, they should take it as unliterary, but as literally as possible. So that should be some detail of world building, some clue as to the villain's weakness, some direct order about what they're supposed to do next, or something along those lines. Above all, you don't want your characters to consider this in a particular text, in a particular context. You don't want to have them thinking about, oh, this is poetry, so we should interpret it this way, or, oh, it's this author writing a historical document, or a record or a letter of some kind, so we should bring this lens to interpret it. And they shouldn't have too much of an emotional reaction to it either. They should use the book and its contents like you would use Google or a Wikipedia page. Like, very straightforward, very get the information, get out. Technique number 3. So if you don't have your characters reading a book as something to advance the plot along, you should use the books as drugs. Essentially, you want your character to open a book and immediately be transported from whatever emotional state they're currently in to a different emotional state. Either you want them to be calmed down and forget their pain for a bit, or you want them to be revved up and excited. So, uppers or downers, essentially. And you'll have to say whether this book is an upper or whether it's a downer, but other than that, you really don't have to describe the experience too much, and you don't have to make it relevant to whatever the character's emotional arc is. And they definitely shouldn't learn something from that book that they bring back into the narrative, because that's just too complicated and confusing. It's escapism. Books are escapism from reality. They don't teach us about reality. Technique number 4 is books as set pieces. You don't really have to have your main characters interact with books at all to write a book about books. You can get a lot of mileage out of just shoving them into locations with a lot of books in them already, like libraries or bookstores or old homes with a very extensive collection of books. And you can have them interact with a side character who's reading a book when the characters arrive, and when the characters start talking to him, he's just like, "Oh, I'm so sad to be putting down my book. Put it aside. Okay, let's get going with the main plot, whatever that is." So when the plot happens, the books go away. But just having them around will make people think that they're relevant somehow. Technique number 5 is getting a little bit into characterization. This will usually apply to your protagonist, and it's a little bit strange. Let me explain what it's about. Technique 5 is books as faulty life advice. So you'll have your character and they'll try to use books as a way to interpret reality or use what they've learned from books to help them in whatever their situation is, but the joke is that they're wrong and stupid. For example, you might have a female protagonist who is like, "Oh, I never knew love would be so complicated. I thought it would be all longing glances and charming notes, like in a Jane Austen novel." And anyone who's actually read Jane Austen is like, seriously? Like, in every single Jane Austen book, the main driver of conflict in every relationship is money. It's all about money. It's all about money and class and social standing. It's a vicious dog-eat-dog world. How on earth would you get sweet, longing sighs and romance out of a Jane Austen book? Because there's good romance in there, but that is not the point at all. So it's a bit weird that you would have books being useless and stupid in a book about books, because usually they praise books pretty highly, but this is a very useful technique to convey that your protagonist is reading. Okay, now let's talk about your protagonist in the book about books without books. Your protagonist has to be a reader. This is so your actual reader will identify with them and feel like they have some shared values. However, you should not give your protagonist any well-defined preferences at all. Preferences are very specific to different people. You can also learn a lot about someone by what they enjoy and what media they like to consume. So if you give your character preferences, it's a lot of work. You actually have to think about, what would this person like? What would they dislike? And you would also end up making the protagonist less of a blank slate that the reader can project themselves onto. So I rated my bookshelf and I took some random books. So as an example, I'm going to show you the covers and you'll see if actually seeing 3 books that the same person likes is any different from hearing this person likes books. So here's one. Here's The Divine Comedy, and here's some Edgar Allan Poe short stories, and here's the annotated Lolita. Yeah, actually, Lolita references both Poe and Dante. What a coincidence. So moving on, another thing you'll want to be careful of with your protagonist is to make sure there's no evolution in the protagonist's reading taste. If a protagonist liked a book at 5, they like it now. And if they didn't like a book, they'll never like it because the book is just bad. Showing a character's preferences evolving can be a really cool way of showing a character arc and how the events of the story have impacted the protagonist. But again, that's a lot of work, because not only do you have to figure out this person's preferences, you have to like actually think about how events impacted them and changed their reactions and the way they interact with what they read. And that's hard. So if you can't use preferences, how do you convince your reader that your protagonist is actually reading? This is very simple, and you do not even have to open a book in order to do it. You have to just take a book and go to the back. On the back of the book, you will see either a plot summary or some choice quotes that will tell you what impression of the book you are supposed to get, and that will tell you what to put in your book about books. So let's see. I'll have my character read The Lord of the Rings. It is among the greatest works of imaginative fiction of the 20th century, an extraordinary work, pure excitement. So I would write something like, she opened The Lord of the Rings, which she loved so much. It was so exciting, and it was so imaginative, and it was such a great adventure. You see, now we've created the impression that the character is actually reading The Lord of the Rings, but we have no idea like what actually happens in the book or what the themes are or like what would actually stay with this person or anything like that. Finally, a really good way to convince your readers that you know a lot about books when you don't is to incorporate as many woke points as possible. And for woke points, you do not actually have to read any books. You can usually just go to reviews about the books, and especially modern reviews about older books. So essentially, you want to find any book that has something racist, something sexist, something anti-LGBT in it, which isn't too hard to do. And then you want to have your main character specifically dislike that book because of those bad things. And those bad things can be a pretty small part of the text in general, but you want to have your protagonist zero in on those things. And contrary to normally when you would just go for the most obvious back of the book interpretation, you want to completely throw that out the window and not give any thought to the context or any literary merit the work might still have, and just zero in on that writer sure was a sexist. And then your protagonist looks really smart because there's this thing that people are supposed to like that they don't like. And it's like giving them a preference, but you still don't actually have to know a lot about the book to write that preference in. So this has been my tutorial on how to write a book with books without any books. I hope you found these techniques helpful. I think that you'll find them reflected in a lot of different authors, but not Michelanda. You're perfect, Michelanda. Also, Princess Tutu is perfect. If you don't want to be this guy, you can use the techniques outlined in this video and create something that will convince your readers that you're saying something deep, even when you're not. All right. Thank you for watching.